And I think that, yes, that's the case in some cases. I think the Scott Roeder guy, I think he was unbalanced. Right? But people like Paul Hill, who methodically planned what he was going to do when he shot those abortion doctors in Pensacola, Florida in 93, and I think John Brown, who methodically planned what his plan to attack Harper's Ferry, he developed for 20, 30 years. I think that we have to be careful not to assume that extremism means irrational and not thinking. And so therefore, if those of us who believe that fanaticism has a place in politics, that doesn't mean that that tactics and strategies and a knowledge of when to attack, when not to attack, don't matter, because they absolutely do. I mean, one thing that makes, let's go back to some of your question about what makes Brown different from the ELF, is in some ways, I think John Brown he knew his moment. John Brown got the moment right. 1859, fall of 1859, there's already, he was in Kansas in 1855, 1854, 55, which he's seen he participated in shootouts between the side called the Free Soil side, which was against slavery because basically they were white supremacists who didn't want black folks onto their little patch of land, versus the slave masters who wanted to basically take Kansas and make it one big plantation. He participated in battles there. He knew that the struggle over slavery was a struggle over who's going to control the West. Is New Mexico, is Arizona, is Kansas, is California, the Northwest, is this going to be slave territory or free territory? He knew that this is where the battle was. And so he knew that when he attacked slavery, he was going to set shit off. He caught his historical moment correctly. And his tactics were perfect with the time. Whereas I think that the ELF and Scott Roeder and Paul Hill and they think that they're going to do the same thing. We're going to set off John Brown. We're going to be the next John Brown. The anti-abortion movement is always, the radicals are always comparing themselves to abolitionists. They completely misread their historical moment. They completely misread it. So I want to agree with you that just because you want to consider fanatical tactics and approaches doesn't mean you don't consider tactical thinking, strategic thinking, etc. Once in a while, the crazy nutball who can pop shit off. Most of the time, the crazy nutball just does crazy nutball things. Yes, sir.
Would you say then that fanaticism fails at the point when it starts to try to repeat something kind of without assessing the historic situation, kind of like what happened with Robespierre in the French Revolution, to where it's the institutionalization of fanaticism that causes it to fail because it no longer looks at the historical circumstances. It doesn't try to reevaluate things based upon the effects that the previous act caused. Would you say that that's kind of what leads to the failure? Almost like the idea that, well, if I blow this thing up, then things are going to change. But that's not the issue. It's a matter of like having some sort of like theoretical apparatus at work prior to the act of terrorism, prior to the act of violence.
I want to say that there's two criteria, I think, to evaluate whether fanaticism was effective or not. The first one is by the fanatic's own criteria. Did the fanatic change the common sense of society? Right? Did they change common sense? Did they build a new hegemony? Robespierre created a new hegemony, the French Revolution. So I would say by that criteria, Robespierre and the terror of the French Revolution was a success. And I would say that Scott Roeder is a failure because he failed to change the common sense about abortion to get most Americans thinking that abortion is murder. He's failed to do that. So I would say by that criterion, Robespierre successful, Scott Roeder unsuccessful.
He shut down the abortion clinics for a few days.
I'm not denying that, but he has not changed public opinion. And I don't want to deny the effectiveness, the impact of shutting down one of 3 clinics in the country that performs late-term abortions. That's an important, significant impact. But his goals are much broader. And by the broader goals, he failed. But I think the other criteria which those of us in this room want to evaluate extremism is not just did it create a new common sense, but did it create a common sense consistent with a free society? And that way, and I think that basically, I think there's 3 criteria to decide whether fanaticism creates a free society. One is, does it increase the ability of ordinary people to have a say in those affairs that affect their daily life? If fanaticism does that, that's a good thing. Right? Second of all, does fanaticism does it increase what some people call pluralism? Does it enable people to come up with new ideas, or does it shut new ideas down? Does it increase dogmatic enforce dogmatism, or does it undermine dogmatism? Abolitionism undermined dogmatism, for example. And then I think the third criteria that I think is does the fanaticism dehumanize the enemy? In other words, does it depict the enemy as so inhuman that you can wipe them out, and not because they're lemmings, they're scum? Like when one of the most famous abolitionists and defenders of fanaticism is this guy named Wendell Phillips from Boston. And Wendell Phillips was the most fucking hated man in America in the South, right? He couldn't step foot in the South, he'd be lynched. And he was almost lynched in Boston. But he was also, but one day an Arkansas slaveholder was visiting Boston. He wanted to see where the cradle of liberty and American Revolution stuff was. Well, he goes, I only know one person. It's this motherfucker Wendell Phillips, whose guts I hate, but I read about all the time. Knocks on his door and says, hey, Wendell, want to show me around? And Wendell's like, yeah, but you're going to hear a sermon against slavery while I do it. Right, and I might not have taken that motherfucker around. I might have punched him in the nose instead. But it shows me what Wendell Phillips did is he didn't dehumanize the enemy. He didn't look at that guy as scum who can be eliminated and not feel guilty. When you see that happening, that movement's going nowhere good. So I think dehumanization, encouraging the proliferation of ideas, and encouraging the development and participation of all people in public affairs. That's when I would talk about a fanaticism that's effective or successful.
In response to, I guess, the point on pluralism, do you think that there's a line that one draws to in terms of if we look at just our own kind of social environment in terms of proliferation of choices, where there's a certain extent to where most of us would draw a line at certain sets of choices, such as luxury yachts, the ability to partake of certain luxuries that we might say might draw the line on, say, like, that's not going to be included in our idea of pluralism.
Well, I think you're ultimately right that pluralism means you can think as much as you want as long as it's within my ideological framework. I think that's true. There's no way out of that. There's no way out of that. And for the record, all yacht owners should probably be burned at the stake, right? But should we allow yacht owners to defend their idea of having a yacht? Yeah, sure. Talk about it. Right? I mean, one of the things that's famous about abolitionist meetings, and I always can come back to the abolitionist movement on this, is they allowed pro-slavery opinion at their meetings. And then they immediately went to crush it. And I think anytime you hide an idea or repress an idea, you're scared of that idea. And that speaks to insecurity and immaturity in the movement. And so I think you got to let the ideas go. When you seek to organize it, I'm going to organize people to buy yachts. I'm like, can't do that. But I think you really have to encourage the proliferation of ideas, even ideas that fundamentally challenge your core, while admitting that, yes, you're still dealing within a secular framework or an Islamist framework. There's still an ideological framework. You can't do anything about that.